ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Executive Book Club, where the basic premise is that we read for you. We take a book every 2 weeks approximately, and we work through it and present it as a way to keep ourselves sharp and also to help you as an executive guide your journey. Now, for me, the interesting thing about today's book is that when we decided to do this book, the world was a lot less complex in South Africa. And I think that complexity has changed exponentially over the last 2 weeks. And we even looked at this book before that. So I think that the message is very timely, and I think as we're getting into it, it will be interesting. And I'm joined by Frik Landman, our CEO at Stellenbosch Graduate Institute, and my colleague in Eduvos, one of our other ventures. And we are very excited to explore this concept, which I know is close to your heart, Frik.
Yeah, it is indeed, and it resonates with a number of things that we have done and spoke about in the past. Things like systems thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah, so without any kind of further ado, we'll get into it. And please feel free if you've got any questions to ask them in the chat. There's no guarantee that we'll be able to answer them, but we'll definitely give a very solid opinion about it. So that's it, and welcome to everybody joining. Great. Okay, so a little bit about the book. The book's about 290 pages, so it's a fairly solid read. It's also written in a way that you have to read it. It's not just skim through book, and it tends to be a set of cohesive stories that flow into each other, so you can kind of read it a bite at a time. And as I'll go through it, I'll touch on each one of these sections in terms of some of the things that is outlined, and the kind of just broad concept of what is a team of teams, how do you put together one, how does this work? So that's the core of it. So the book starts off with a very interesting place, which I'll talk about just now, which is the Proteus problem, which if you don't know who Proteus is, it will be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to tell you who Proteus is in the first section. It talks how do we go from being many different organizations or different silos to kind of a one organization. The role of sharing, which I won't share all of the tricks and tools that he's putting out in the book there, but definitely a lot in that. And then how do you take the hands off and lead like a gardener, and also looking ahead. So it's digestible. It's a relatively slow read. I would say that I would budget like a good week and a half to read it if you're reading with intent. So cool, let's get into it. Okay, so the author, primary author, is a guy by the name of General Stanley McChrystal. He led the Afghanistan campaign. He did the boots on ground, and he moved from taking that from a non-entity to various tours. You always hear on TV and etc. that there was multiple tours, and I think he did about 3 of those. And the interesting part, and where the book comes from, is his reflection on the fact that what they had to do there was unlike what they had to do anywhere else before, and it required a whole new organizational structure, which turned out to be a team of teams. So he's bringing that reflection into the story, and at the other end of it, he's also saying that well, because things were so different there, many of the kind of traditional structures didn't work for them, and they were getting in some really bad situations. So I'm not a great fan of American war stories, but he does tell a good story, and he really did do very radical kind of strategy in what he was doing there. But luckily the book isn't just about that. So if you don't like reading about that type of stuff, there's lots in there for different aspects. So he basically was kind of nicely asked to leave the army after he had a big fight with Biden, and he retired. So that is because he's honest. He says it as it is. He's radical and he thinks differently. Okay, so those weren't necessarily the characteristics that was required from him after having done his job for an extended period of time. He wrote another book, which I'm really interested to read a little bit more about, which is Risk, a User's Guide. So I think he would be a good writer for that, and I'm planning to look at that one soon. And it's tempting to think that he was the only person writing the book, but there's actually 3 other authors, and I suspect he did the overarching strategy like he would, and he had a team that took care of the details, he prepared notes. But it's very structured, so I'm sure that there was a lot of thought that went into it. Okay, cool. Okay, so kind of let's get into it. So I know, Frick, if you're familiar, obviously having read the book recently, Proteus, it talks about the sons of Proteus. So Menelaus was a king of Sparta who wanted to desperately get home after a 10-year kind of Trojan War. Now imagine if you have been fighting those epic battles that we read about, and Jason and all of those people were on your ships. You desperately want to get home, but then magically he gets stuck on the island of Pharos, okay, where they put up that amazing lighthouse. So Proteus, which is known as the Old Man of the Sea, which is an immortal character, had the secret to help them to get off the island. So through some conniving and some stories and things and stuff, he eventually finds out, Menelaus finds out that he's going to have to challenge Proteus. Okay, because if he can get Proteus defeated, he would be able to get those secrets so that he could get home. Okay. The problem was that Proteus was a shapeshifter. Okay, so he could change his character, and he would change his appearance whenever he's cornered. And so next thing you're dealing with a vicious beast, and then after that he turns into an element, and it wasn't easy to he was intractable in that way. So his men disguised themselves in sealskins, and they surprised Proteus on the beach. And when Proteus came out, he first changed into like a bearded lion, and then a serpent, and then a panther, and then a wild boar, and then a torrent of water, and then a tree with soaring tops. And every time he changed, the Greeks hung firmly on him, adjusted their approach, dug into the fur or to the rooftops, or not rooftops, the water. They hugged the trees, and they, like, whatever they needed to do to get through that stage, they went with each one of those ships, and eventually they defeated the Old Man of the Sea. But it wasn't a single enemy, and this is where he starts off to say, you know what, like, we live in that world where one approach is not going to work anymore. Okay, and we can't just go in one energy and try to solve stuff, because the problem changes as we're starting to dig through it. So we need a better way to deal with it. And he reflects on the fact that it is the small team of warriors that was so adaptable that kind of the base of the assault.
It's interesting. I almost get a sense that Protheus is the metaphor for complexity, and or what we try and call the VUCA world. And I think just our attempt to put the complexity in an acronym VUCA is our a symptom of our need to have things structured and neatly packaged. At least this complexity we understand as volatile and
absolutely complex, and yeah, absolutely. And the minute I saw the first time VUCA was written, yeah, I knew that some consultants is going to come up with something around vision and acceptance and clarity. What is like? There's another version of VUCA that is now the solution, but it's not that simple. It just isn't that simple, and we have to be ready to deal with the change of appearance of the problem. We think we're dealing with one thing, we start solving that, and we find out, oh, hang on, it's a lot more complex. There's a bigger system here. It's not just about winning always.
Because if you really want to bind Protheus, you have to be in the moment there. You can't call a committee or wait for next week's board meeting. You have to be in the moment there and deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And the forces on the field, and they don't know what to prepare for. They don't know what to do, etc. And it almost asks, well, we'll get into that. But I think the two things are that every competence that person had while doing this fight was critical. Okay. And the second aspect is whatever you could bring to the party, you needed to bring then and there. So I really like your point from that perspective, is to say it doesn't mean that they were untrained, okay, but they weren't necessarily structured. And I think that's kind of the start of the premise of the argument. Yeah. Then he spends a bit of time around talking about Taylor. Now, anybody in management theory understands this guy called Taylor. That's a highly educated guy, went off and spent 6 months on a factory floor, and then started thinking about how to reorganize work and became really the prototypical or archetypical manager that could achieve efficiencies. He wrote down principles. I know that when I started studying management, one of the first lessons was the 10 principle of Taylorism, just get it in there early so that we can indoctrinate you, because anything that you manage is going to be better, isn't it? So, and we're going to organize, and we're going to specialize, and we're going to put in control, plan, organize, lead, control. Okay, and that's its roots is like a well-defined philosophy that was invented by Taylor, and that kind of dominated from the 30s to the post-war, with the whiz kids and all of those types of people that came and used analysis to support a better way to organize, a better way to specialize, a better way to put in place hierarchy and control.
And it was almost a logical and inevitable result of the worldview, the mechanistic worldview. The world is one big machine, you just have to put the parts, and then everything will work.
And as long as we see there's a problem, we can walk in the problem. We then restructure the resources. We get that done. We put in place hierarchy, control, all of that works. Okay, but clockwork has a limit. Okay, so that's an interesting. And there's some things in the book around it, but the real thing that I have been thinking about a lot is to say, traffic lights is an interesting example. Okay, where if you've got a very busy intersection, then when you put a traffic light there, it's supposed to make everything more efficient. Yeah, but if the queues become too long, the only thing that you could do is make the cycle by which the traffic light changes faster. Okay, because that's what we often do. So we get the communication to a central point faster. But then the minute you actually get to the optimum point of that, the traffic light is the stop street again. Okay, because then only one car at a time moves, because that's the fastest way that you can take long queues through that. And we've seen this. It's the theory of the batch of one, single straight through processing, focus on the individual customer, etc., etc. So we're constantly trying to find better ways to make our traffic light stop streets. And the stop street itself becomes a self-regulating mechanism that's always open, always available. And for me, that was just a way to think about it for myself, that I think clockwork has a limit. The rules are there. We know we need to stop, give somebody else a chance. But eventually, and it makes me think of those big Indian intersections where, you know, there's 12 people moving at the same time and 18 cars coming from the other side, and they kind of stop in the middle-ish, and eventually everybody gets to the other side, you know. And that's the complexity of clockwork that's going to the next level, especially when it's at scale. Okay, good. So we're moving on.
So just, Rian, just a comment on the side. The two things that resonated with me in that section is, and I really, people can differ from my style, but management is not a science.
No, not at all.
And it's really not a science. It's and that whole notion of an organization as a big clockwork or as a is so out of kilter. What an organization is, a human populated system, and each one of those human beings have got this gift. They have a free choice. They can work slow, fast, good, not good. Well, so it's not dependent on the clockwork. That ain't gonna fix it. You need something else in a human populated system where people have free choice and where they have vision, where they have skills which may not be employed at that time. But you can't see the organization as a machine.
And yeah, and I mean, I really like your point in terms of saying, you know, it's about vision and hopes and aspirations, etc. Drive a lot more. And yeah, we can optimize metrics, but when are we optimizing for purpose? Because in our currently complex world, purpose is a very strong driver, as we see. So I found, and I highlighted this section, and I took the time to type it out, to say the pursuit of efficiency, which has been to get the most at the least investment of time, energy, and money, was once a laudable goal. But being effective in today's world is less a question of optimizing for a known, and, well, I would change that as previously stable set of variables, than responsiveness to a constantly shifting environment. Adaptability, not efficiency, must become our central competency. And I've seen it in a lot of organizations that actually measures the rate at which they're adapting, the frequency and how fast they shift becomes the biggest driver. And those are the really fast and some of the biggest organizations that have grown over the last 20 years.
See, one of our guests asked, is it 70% art and 30% science? And my response is not a direct answer, but I would almost say that we have to constantly skill and reskill people.
Yeah.
The one skill they need is what you now refer to as that adaptability, that willingness and that ableness to adapt to the situation, and then be able to discern which set of tools and skills I need, because Proteus is changing shape all the time. When he's water, what tools do I use? When he's a tree, when he's a rock, when he's sand, how do I deal with that? You know, and if I don't, I won't bind Proteus. So I have to be very agile in how I operate, not efficient, but agile.
Absolutely. And so it's, and I also like the question from a perspective of saying, you know, if you had to employ in your organization, do you employ 70% artists or 30% scientists, and would that be a better outcome? You know, that's an interesting view, because in our current world, it is the creative and the adaptable and the philosophical people that are more resilient and driving a harder game. But the science needs to be there. And I think that there's also the point around the toolbox is very, very important. Okay, so we'll get there. So I want to share this part of the story. So on the left-hand side is how you would typically fight a naval battle. Okay, so there's a bunch of ships that line up on the one side, a bunch of ships on the other side. And then you would have a plan by which you kind of take this and like try to get closer to these. And then the traditional naval battles were fought with kind of a war of attrition. Whoever could get enough shots at the right time into the enemies would eventually defeat the other side of the fleet. Okay, so the book has quite a nice reflection on the Battle of Trafalgar, where Nelson was fighting the French, the combined French and Spanish fleet, and he basically wiped them out practically without any loss on his side. Okay, and what he did is, innovatively, he decided that he's going to not face them in the traditional way, but in a way where he will utilize his forces to cut this army in three. So you would drive through there, and they will shoot through that. There will be a middle, and there would be the other side, and you would just pound them. So you had to kind of go in, cut the army into three sections, or the Navy, sorry, into three sections, and then shoot the hell out of it. Okay, which wasn't a new idea, but the way he did it was a new idea. Okay, he basically set a mission parameter which says we're going to destroy this fleet without any losses. Okay, so that was already upfront mission parameter, and he gave each one of these ships the overall plan of what they needed to do, and on another level then made sure that every one of those captains had a clear understanding of what their role is going to be in this in case they get cut off or there is a communication. Well, the French army, the French and Spanish fleet, used an old system of signals where the central admiral would look at what's happening on the battlefield and then send orders, and that would then determine how these ships would change their approach, or etc. So he basically set in place all of these individual little boats on an entrepreneurial mission to go destroy the enemy. Well, the enemy had a hierarchical system by which they decided to by what needed to do. So when the battle changed from this to that in a very short space of time, they kept on signaling each other, but the signals didn't get through, so they didn't even know what they needed to do, and none of the commanders on any of these ships had the ability to make decisions, because they had to wait for the admiral to do so, and they were like spending all of their time waiting for the signal. And I think that was an interesting reflection, and the outcome of this was an overwhelming victory for Nelson. I mean, we can talk about what that meant, but I just thought it was interesting. I don't usually like this type of stuff, but he really went into a nice explanation of it. And I think what we can learn from it is to say we need to think innovatively, but just not thinking innovatively also translates into empowering the people that need to make those choices. And doing it in a different way. Otherwise, we all need to understand kind of what's the game plan, but we all need to contribute to that game plan as best we can in the moment. Because if we're going to rely on the CEO becoming the central dispatcher of our organization, it doesn't work. So yeah, fun story. Cool. So the book then kind of goes into the fact that, you know, traditionally we've been in this command structure, traditional top-down structure. The connection that matters are between workers and their managers. an interesting kind of characteristic of most of these organizations is that I talk to the people around me. We talk until we are able to speak to the managers. Then the managers talk to each other until the CEO can basically bring them together. That has kind of, in some organizations, changed. And I think this is a lot of what we're busy doing in COVID, where we still have our kind of traditional management structures, okay? But these teams that kind of run around, and we've got some people that are organizing effectively a set of teams. And what McChrystal is talking about here is to sit and say, well, it's actually becoming a lot more complex, and there's teams of teams, and teams that would actually, in larger organizations, never really meet each other. So there's kind of clusters of teams, and in the center there is a team of teams driving it. And there's been a lot of kind of different ways to think about it, but I think these types of hybrid structures are very real in reality, in terms of how things are working. And if I look at a lot of organizations now, they're basically saying, well, there's no time for you to actually wait for a message to go up a hierarchy and down a hierarchy, which used to be the kind of command and control structure. There is now only like, I need to speak to you, we need to get this done, you need to contribute to that as best we can, and let's figure out how to make the most of the time that we're spending together and getting that part done. While I think some organizations currently in the COVID kind of context is still a lot of this, like it's just, there's a team, the team kind of meets, and the leader in that team ends up representing somebody in this, in a larger control structure. So interesting. There's a lot of detail in the book around stuff that like this, so definitely worth exploring.
The thing, Rian, you might get to that later, and apologies if I preempted it. But the thing that he says, especially if I look at that sketch of team of teams, because it looks messy.
Yeah.
But what he says that keeps that together are two things: purpose and trust.
Yeah.
There you are.
Cool. Go. Keep talking.
No. Everybody on the different teams, if everybody has a clear understanding of where are we heading, what is that, and what is the purpose of where we want to end up, and we can trust one another to use our skills to get to that destination. We do not necessarily have to run along pre-designed little grooves to get to that destination, because the landscape is changing. But the important thing is to be trusted with our skills and our ability to get to that destination, and it may not be along the hierarchical grooves that have been laid down for us in the past or currently.
Absolutely. And I also get the sense that, I think that there's a very important idea around how to build a common purpose that we sometimes miss, which is to say, it doesn't have to be this massive purpose, okay? It just has to be common, okay? We all have to work towards the same thing, even if that thing is what we are working on right now. So let's just say we're in a war situation and we need to get food, okay? That's what we're working towards. And as long as everybody understands that, okay, each person could do their portion of it. We don't have to come up with this, we better have to survive until kingdom comes, kind of big, overwhelming common purpose. We just need to work together. And those small amounts of working together is as important as the big overarching common purpose. And I think that's an important element which I got from reading this, which I think we underestimate that, because that builds trust as well. If we as a collective can achieve small things, we can achieve big things, okay? And we become bolder and we have this empowered execution. but it comes from the shared consciousness. And for me, it was highlighted recently in a discussion where somebody was saying they were sitting in a room, and for the first time in a long time, they started seeing how their work connects with everybody else's work and how they need to operate so that they can understand that that person needs my input to do the work so that that person can do their work. And that interdependence creates a shared consciousness. Okay. And if we all understand, okay, my portion here is really, really important, then we tend to start doing more that is within the job description, within the kind of just focus point, because of that shared consciousness and building that interdependence. So I thought that was also a very kind of powerful thing, that we need to realize our interdependence. And then empowered execution, I think the principle there is, if I know what needs to get done next, I will be more efficient in allocating my time, and that then creates speed. Okay, and the speed, because we're all seeing it happen, as long as I'm in the execution flow, it empowers me in itself as well. You know, so there's like these two systemic things. None of it will happen if there isn't trust and at least some purpose, a common purpose. Yeah, cool. Really powerful paradigm. And then I think we've got a comment there. Often leaders expect to be trusted based on their role or position. Common purpose will lead to earning trust and getting collective buy-in, not just to expect things. I fully agree with Bongani. I think this isn't positional trust. I won't trust you because you're the boss. Okay, this trust is from working together, like that safe space, challenging ideas, getting stuff done together. If I can see that you're contributing to our collective. So in that, we're building towards the same common purpose. That's where that trust comes from. Okay. Cool. Okay. So so what is needed? We need to kind of start looking at changing our management structures by moving from scalable efficiency to scalable adaptability in order to succeed. And I think we've all experienced that during COVID, where we've had to become scalably adaptive. Like, okay, we don't know if somebody's going to be here today or tomorrow, or they might be out for a week or 2 weeks, but we still need to get the job done. And I think that that's the kind of characteristic that will be common in organizations going forward. But there is some lessons to learn around that, to say, okay, but that only works once you start communicating differently, start managing differently, and we need to ask ourselves, are we doing enough in our organizations already to enable that kind of flexibility? And can we now leverage that and make more of it and actually thrive in this scenario? Okay. So in a traditional org chart where we were about scalable efficiency, we were all about doing things right. Okay, we need 5 people to do this job. They will report to these, etc., etc. We build a hierarchy, research and development. Everybody's building their thing, and we've got these high-level interfaces where we're talking about, okay, well, I think for a long time in the IT industry really did a lot of this because of digital transformation and in information enablement, where we can now communicate far more effectively through mechanisms such as these that we're busy on. We can diffuse a message in a very different way, which takes away some of the complexity that existed before. And I was actually reflecting on this recently in terms of I think it was a comment that I read somewhere on Twitter where somebody said, you know, do we still need politicians? Because politicians are this hierarchical structure that says that we should run society. Yeah, aren't we at a place where, you know, we could, as a bunch of people and organizations, etc., come together and solve these bigger problems? So I think that's an interesting philosophical question, but it also highlights what we're looking at here to say, you know, if we start building a shared consciousness, for example, around climate change and those types of things, very soon we'll be in empowered execution, and policy and other things are actually going to stand in our way to achieve some of those concepts. Yeah. Cool. See you wiggling around, but you don't want to say anything. Just teasing. Oh, are you talking to the mute button? That's so like old.
So it's so 2020.
Yeah.
Now, I was tempted to refer to what happened last week in our country.
Yeah.
And I think there is maybe a theoretical purpose for us as South Africans in this sense.
Yeah.
But I don't think the trust levels, I think there's a big trust deficit amongst us on different levels, industries, private versus government, civil society amongst one another, civil society with companies. I think the trust levels are low, and well, maybe that's another.
The interesting thing is, it's an event like that paradigmatically shifts the basis of trust. Okay, because it used to be government versus business, etc. And what we now, like I've seen so much mobilization over the last week of people sitting and saying, well, we sitting down and figuring out what can we do about this. Yeah. So it changes. I fundamentally agree that trust deficit actually creates a space to build a new trust. Okay, because the old trust is not going to work. Okay, we know that. So that's where the consciousness creates the execution, and the execution will drive the trust. So interesting. I like your analysis of it. We moving into kind of a far more complex world, and I think where this for me is like an interesting thing, where we have complicated systems that have multiple components that join together in a predictable and deterministic way, is the way that we used to do stuff. So we used to have a marketing function, and they used to go and they get leads and prospects and things and stuff. We qualify them, we send them proposals, etc. And what's now happening, it's a lot more complex, because there's a lot more regulation, there's a lot more complexity, there's a lot more other stuff, and eventually we're in a far more customer-orientated environment, and the complex systems have multiple components that interact in unpredictable ways. So it's not as easy as just putting a product to market these days. We have to understand the context, the social impact, environmental impact, etc. All of those elements have made it very complex, a lot more complex than even when I started doing business, which isn't that long ago. Yeah, so we need to understand how to interact in this complex environment. And we all know, like, how do you run a business if you have to shut it down for a couple of weeks every once in a while? You know, you have to think about stuff very, very differently. You have to ask, is there ways that we can virtualize it, that we can do stuff? How do you, like, I'm seeing such a lot of systemic change being driven right now, where, so we can't export our citrus in South Africa, okay? So we're going to eat our own export quality citrus in South Africa, which is interesting. But there's probably a market for it, yeah, which we didn't really understand before. Maybe the yields are different, etc. But that's now a reality. Those are the types of things that we then have to, as business, understand and adapt and develop. Because if you just lament the fact that, oh, okay, we can't export our citrus, then it rots in the different places that it is at. So complicated versus complex is a reality that we're starting to face every single day. The two shifts that has to happen, and I think we kind of touched on that already, in terms of saying, you know, instead of kind of the silos of communication where the boss deals with their reports, who deals with their reports, who deals with their reports, okay, 7 layers down, we need to create a lot of lateral connectivity. Okay, so teams connecting to teams, individuals connecting to teams, senior leaders being in the lowest level of the organization, driving part of what needs to happen there, juniors taking on responsibility, etc., so that it becomes far more unclear exactly who's running the show here. And the people that are running the show run so because they're bringing certain competencies and experiences, not just because they're bringing authoritative power. So that kind of shared consciousness, that we really know what's going on, that we're constantly reviewing what's going on and having collective conversations. And the way that they've done it, and that the book describes in the military, is that they started doing joint planning. So the people that are actually going to execute the mission is part of the planning. Okay, and then when they do their debriefs, they're all there and they're learning. It's not about managers sitting down and learning. It's about the organization learning. And in that, the leadership power really shifts to the periphery rather than to the center, which is a key element of creating a shared consciousness. But also then the second shift that you have to get right is moving from a place where the boss hands down decisions and the teams gather information for those decisions, to where teams are empowered to make decisions at all levels, and we creating that space in which that information is disseminated, but also comes back to certain key control points and visibilities that sit there and say, well, okay, yeah, we won't spend more because of this, but that's information. It's not the boss's job to bring information all the time. It's the boss's job to make sure that everybody has the right information so they make the right choices.
That's very interesting, because you see that happen in a thing in South Africa that we call bosberaad. Okay. So in the hierarchy system, the tip of the triangle goes off into a bosberaad. They have 2-3 days there. They come back with this magnificent plan, facilitated by a very expensive consultant, and the document has got a thud factor of 7. And they come back and they announce this beautiful strategy, and they throw the switches, but the lights don't go on at the bottom, and everybody is quite surprised that the lights don't go on, because there's a disconnect. That they come with this distilled product, but the rest of the organization who ought to implement this was not part of that whole funnel of conversation taking place until they got to the distilled product. So you cannot deal with it in that way, announce and let it happen, if people do not share that that holistic view of where we're heading.
And I think that's what I'm finding, especially now during COVID with larger teams, is that even like having conversations with people and clarifying stuff is the most valuable endeavor from a leadership perspective, because you think that somebody understands, and then when you like literally go and put it on the screen and we're talking about it collectively on a Teams call, etc., we're starting to get a different view of a shared understanding, etc. But then after that point, it's embedded already, so it's bringing the right people to have a conversation, to look at it, and we cannot under communicate currently, because it's not like it used to be an office where you can stick it up on a wall. The only way that we know what we're doing here collectively is by having a conversation. So we need to have more of those conversations, and everybody needs to be in on the conversation, because otherwise that person sitting there at home not doing what we're doing here, okay, because we don't have that shared meaning. So it's a very, very real thing, which I don't think a lot of organizations have thought it through. So we need to think it through a lot more in terms of saying, what am I doing to make sure that that person has the correct information to make great decisions as they're sitting there, still working from home, still going through all the other stuff, because it's not going to be like it was forever. But this is interesting, because this wasn't written in a COVID context, and it was saying that this is a better way to do stuff anyway. Okay. Cool. A lot in the book, and I'm just conscious of time. around how teams work on projects, how we should promote teamwork, and we need to interact to achieve a common goal, and that goal is there to satisfy the market. Only when we truly understand what our organization is can we design one. Organizations are whole systems. Organizational design is the science, not the magic, of enabling different competencies to achieve the goals for which they have been brought together. So the idea here really is that you need to ask yourself, do we have the competencies in our organization to attack these markets? And that's the stuff that people become responsible for. And it's not just a functional area in the traditional sense. So we have to think about it very, very differently. Okay.
So I'm just wondering, Rian, what kind of mind shift is needed in a corporate, in the top minds? What shift needs to happen to adopt such a philosophy? And do we have that kind of maturity and trust to go from the theory of this book to the reality of the organization and applying this? I mean, the author was confronted with what he saw on the ground with Al Qaeda, and he saw the structured hierarchical way is not going to work, so he was forced. But I'm wondering if in our leadership domain we see that are we aware of the fact that we need to change, and do we have the maturity to consider this, to work through this, and possibly apply this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think in what you're saying, like if you go back to like Galbraith's work, and where he talked about critical chain project management, which is also referenced in this book, he proposed very early on, like in the late 80s, early 90s, that there is a better way to organize our work. Okay, so that's the payoff for the executives, is to say there is a better way to organize, and not everything needs to depend on you, and you need to start measuring yourself as how am I doing this as fast and smoothly as possible, and am I enabling that? Because I can't do all of it, and I don't have to control it. Okay, so that's the big maturity thing that you're talking about. It's like, are we willing to say that we're not in control? Okay, because in a certain sense, the whole shareholding structure is designed around that. It's like holding somebody accountable. Like we have directors, you're accountable; managers, you're accountable for the portion of what the directors need to do, etc. Well, the really big organizations have changed. Okay. Microsoft, Apple, those organizations are the Elon Musk organizations. They've got a mission, okay, and there you go. And somebody will check the revenue. Somebody will make sure that the money came in, but how you organized isn't necessarily the primary focus of management. There's a goal system. We're all driving against it, and we're delivering, and that's it. You know, that's there's less of a debate around how do we structure this than what are we here to do, okay, and getting that done. So there is a big mind shift, but I don't think it's that big, and there's a better payoff for it. Those organizations grow. But I think the part of the mind shift is to sit and say, well, you know, how am I making the team competent, and what are my team-based competencies, and what can I best do with those competencies? Becomes a very different set of discussions than what I think is currently happening in managerial structures. But excellent question, as always. And there's the point around the critical chain, so I won't go on to that. One of the teams are effective because they trust each other and they have a shared purpose. This is why we call shared consciousness. We did talk about that. But then something that I found, which wasn't in the book, but as I was looking for material to put in the book, I found this, which I thought was a very interesting, different way to start thinking about stuff. To say, what type of team do I need to do this work? Okay, low task complexity, low team membership fluidity. You've got simple work teams. That kind of, we need to start asking a different questions, like not what do I need here? It's like, okay, what type of team is going to do this best? Okay, and how can I put that together? So I thought that was an interesting kind of way to think about it as well, that we need to start asking how do we structure, what's the functionality of this particular team, and can it be applied to this problem? And then get the right people behind it. And I think that's we've seen it, consultants have done it for years, but that kind of idea is now coming to fore in the business. So it does mean kind of like your top management ends up being dealing with more complex stuff as a team, but then enabling other teams to take portions of that and execute it, etc. So it's kind of leveraging the collective consciousness, the collective brain of the whole thing. Cool. I thought this was also an interesting idea. How does a leader stay credible and legitimate when they haven't done what the people you're leading are doing? It's a brand new leadership challenge. It forced me to become a lot more transparent, a lot more willing to listen, a lot more willing to be reverse mentored from lower. Yeah. Who's run organizations in the complexities that we're busy with? Like it's too complex. So we have to change the way and the rules by which this all gets done, because it's just not the same. So I think as leaders we have to then sit back and say, okay, I cannot know everything in my organization. At some level I'm accountable for it. So I better make sure that everybody else knows what I know, okay, and that they know what each other knows, so that we can get the most out of that. So in information enablement, I think is becoming a lot more critical, and then driving a lot more transparent, willing to listen, a lot more kind of lower level engagement than is traditionally. And I've seen this in South African organizations actually as well, where really big players, it's kind of the walk the talk type philosophy, but the people are there. They're in the micro meetings, popping in and understanding what's happening here, why we're doing it, and their job at that point in time is to deliver direction in terms of saying, what are we doing, where are we going, are we respecting our purpose? Because that's the stuff that makes organizations kind of stick together in these complex times. Cool. There was another kind of thing that I saw, which is like, the question was, what's the key to being a renegade with clout in an organization versus one whose ideas are ignored and stonewalled? And the answer was, you have to have empathy. Okay. So empathy is a key enabler of change, adaptability, and agility in organizations. And without empathy, we cannot be inclusive, and without inclusion, we cannot become allocentric. And allocentric is having a common purpose, unity of effort, and we need to prioritize the collective needs over the individual needs. Okay, so, and to get to that point is exactly what the teams of teams is, to sit and say, look, what I need to do must be for the greater purpose. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it as well. Cool. And then, so General McChrystal has like 5 rules of engagement. So it's always the fun part. If you can't make it a list of 5, then how can a manager do it? We all know that that's how we think. What's the cheat sheet here? Okay. The cheat sheet is actually very simple. Every interaction is meaningful. You must always be in control of yourself and your emotions, as each interaction can leave a positive or negative influence on somebody. Okay. You have to be empathic at that point in time. You have to every meaningful connection point, every point that you're connecting is meaningful. And I think as leaders, you start to realize that, because you literally speaking to somebody, making a joke, and somebody else comes into saying like, oh yeah, so and so, and it becomes a rumor and a legend, and etc., etc. It's like that one time I spoke to you in the hall, you said this, like, oh my word, okay. We must lead by example always. If people see you cut corners, that will give them the approval to cut corners, whilst also eroding their ability to trust you. If you cannot be trusted as a leader, know your limitations. Everyone is human. No single person is a silver bullet. Be willing to learn from and listen to subordinates. Leave your ego at the door. Don't hide from mistakes, own them, and learn from them. So that's just kind of the simple rules of engagement. And I think the last one is the key, to say, let's deal with the stuff and create a safe space in which stuff can be dealt with. Because unless we're doing that, I think most organizations can't make the mental shift. So these are simple rules. And I think, yeah, it takes time to build a team that can take these rules and actually operate with them. But it is there. And then I think the other side of it, so that kind of deals with the trust side. The other side is the empowered execution. And so empowered execution is a process of decentralizing decision-making authority with a new organizational structure, a network and non-hierarchical one. One author makes the point that around all militaries around the world have been using decentralized decision-making for almost 80 years. The German military in World War II employed something called Auftragstaktik, which is mission-type order. So you don't tell the person what to do, but you tell the person what the mission is, and they need to do whatever they need to do to get to that mission. And you then train them to within an inch of their lives to be ready for everything along the way. Okay. That's a different way to give orders. So say, our mission here is to do this, okay? And the other one is the Schwerpunkt, which is the point of effort. We don't know what we need to know, but we know that the next thing that we need to do is this, okay? So let's work on that. So anyway, I think there's lots more that we can share. The last thing that I'm going to end off with is to say that leaders should be gardeners, okay? We're not playing a game of chess where we can dictate every move, especially when it's a complex world, but we need to create an environment where every piece can simultaneously grow like a garden of wood, okay? And I think I'm going to kind of stay there, and we've got obviously some great courses that teach some of these ideas, managing teams, managing the project performance, sorry, that should say performance, and our management development program, obviously all focused on aspects of this, and this type of content goes into that world as well.
And my favorite, systems thinking.
Absolutely.
But Jan, just a last comment from my side. I think that, in this book, what we already know is that the speed of change is just increasing. And the need for interdependence on all levels, across all dimensions and all levels. And maybe if we read this book in an organization, not to take this as a recipe, but to start a conversation in the organization, but a cross-cutting groups of conversations where you don't just have marketing in one conversation, because that would go against the grain of the book, but where you have a cross-cutting group of people just starting a conversation in the organization so that the idea ripens and see how you make it real for yourself, because I think there's a lot of value in this. And what is attractive, that it comes from somebody that operated absolutely in the most hierarchical conditions possible.
Yeah. And I think the amazing realization, the radical realization was that we won't defeat our enemy, and our enemy is defeating us because we're so radically hierarchically structured, and we needed to change. And that information technology, at the end of the day, really gives us the tools to do that. So the recording will be available afterwards from the place where you have accessed this, and on our website as SGI. There are multiple recordings of this there. And I look forward to you joining us in a short while for our next book, which we don't know what it is, but in the spirit of the teams of teams, we have a point of focus to go and figure out exactly which one we're going to do next. And And thanks so much for spending the time with us. And please visit our website and look at YouTube of some of our recordings of these in the past. And also we do run great courses for this. So sign up for those and get some more inspiration for you and your team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for this, Rian. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.